Okay. Hello, and welcome to another segment of From the Source. I'm your host, Elizabeth Johnson. With the world facing global pandemic, pressures of every day have multiplied. With quarantining and closure of schools, tensions have arisen, and amongst them is domestic violence. I had the opportunity to speak with Alexandria Roth-Kahn, who's the managing director of the Caring Department at UJA Federation of New York. Alex advances the organization's commitment to ensure that those struggling with life challenges are supported by the Jewish community through strategic planning, grant-making, and convening. The work of the Caring Department supports members of the Jewish community and beyond who struggle with issues related to poverty, employment, aging, disabilities, mental health, and end of life. Alex develops new models of care to respond to these challenges and stimulates innovation in the field. The work of the Caring Department is actualized in New York, Israel, and the former Soviet Union. This morning I have the opportunity to speak with Alexandria Roth-Kahn from UJA Federation. How are you this morning?
Great, thank you.
I would like you to talk a little bit about the pandemic and how it impacts domestic violence.
Well, thank you for having me. This is a really important topic, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share what we've been learning. 1 in 4 women will be victims of severe violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. That is a really staggering statistic. Prior to the COVID outbreak, UJA was on the case. We oversee a network of close to 100 agencies throughout Long Island, Westchester, and New York City. Organizations like the Jewish Board that are part of the New York City shelter system, and the New York Legal Assistance Group that provides free legal services to victims. And we work directly with organizations that support members of the Jewish community affected by domestic violence. OHEL, Amudim, the Safe Center in partnership with the Goral JCC in the 5 towns, and the Shalom Task Force. Other organizations under our umbrella specifically serve the Russian-speaking Jewish community, mainly in southern Brooklyn. At UJA, we convene a bi-monthly professional task force on family violence that helps us to keep current with where needs are and how our philanthropic dollars can be most helpful. And it's really through these deep relationships and the ongoing dialogue that we have with our grantees that we have our hand on the pulse of need. So we quickly understood that for so many, sheltering in place meant sheltering with an abuser. Many family courts suspended services in March and in April. We were all on lockdown and the stress was rising. Financial stress, emotional stress, increased substance abuse. It all makes the situation so much worse. And too often, women become the victims. But we also have to remember that the checks and balances that were part of normal life simply vanished. People stopped bumping into each other in the grocery store, at the park, in line for carpool, and so many other normative settings. And we didn't see each other's bruises. We didn't see the emotional pain on people's faces. And it was harder for all of us to notify and to encourage our friends or our family members to take action. The social isolation that is such a common part of the COVID-19 dialogue was so deeply and remains so deeply present for victims of domestic violence, unable to be reached by others and really struggling at home with an abuser to reach out themselves. It's interesting. In March and in April, the calls were down based on typical rates to our hotlines. But we knew from the social work teams that violence may be up. To call with an abuser right next to you is a horrible thing to do. The outcome on the victim is clear. Someone would turn on their showers and call privately. They would create noise and try to reach out. But the ability to do so when somebody was actually standing over you seemed almost impossible. And for many Jewish women, observant Jewish women who use the mikveh, the ritual bath that women go to on a monthly basis in accordance with the menstruation cycle, that's often a place where bruises are detected or observed by someone who is watching you to immerse in water. And without that type of checks and balances, we also were unable to see women who were affected and who would actually go to the mikveh in the past as a way to call out for help. The situation was made even worse by the fact that when some women did reach out, they understood that the shelter system was at capacity. There weren't actually enough available beds, particularly in March and throughout April, mid-April. A lot of that has to do with the fact that if you were in a shelter, the shelters were allowing you to stay for longer because of the need to social distance, and they didn't want to release children and their mothers into the homes of other family members or a safe haven if there was the risk of transmitting the virus. So exceptions were made, and the beds that were occupied and the turnover rate, which is usually a few days until somebody's able to leave into a safe environment, women and children were allowed to stay, so others couldn't access the beds as easily. And that left us with a really big dilemma.
So how was that handled?
Great. So we actually, in March and in April, started to pay for hotel rooms for victims of domestic violence. And that was a decision that we made in accordance with the shelter system that was actually leading an effort in Albany at the time for state reimbursement for hotel rooms, knowing that the shelters that were in place to absorb these individuals were unable to do it. And so during the Passover holiday and occasionally afterwards, we paid for rooms that provided food and sanctuary, a safe sanctuary for women and their children so that they could leave a violent home. And in some of the Jewish shelter spaces that were operational, we provided increased support for social workers, for mental health therapists, for individuals that were able to provide mentoring and peer support to ensure that these women and their children felt that they were in a cocoon of love to whatever degree possible.
Now, with all of this domestic violence rising, the funding for your programs, where has that come from? Because obviously it costs a lot of money.
Of course. So I'd like to begin by sharing that UJA Federation, since early March, since the pandemic hit our area, has allocated over $46 million in emergency relief.
Wow.
And we're deeply grateful for the support that the community has provided us that's made that work possible. In terms of where the money has been sourced from, it's a combination of factors. Some fundraising that we've done for specific projects, shifting some funds that were meant in a pre-COVID world to address other issues that didn't feel as relevant, or projects that simply couldn't take place as a result of the social distancing guidelines. And those monies were then reappropriated for COVID-related work. And we dipped into our endowment because an endowment is there for a rainy day. It was pouring. It's continuing to pour. And we know that it's our responsibility to provide the resources and then fundraise for them on the other side, but to utilize the endowment that's available to us.
Now, you had said that you received some sort of funding also during this time that has made up with the, utilizing the endowment.
Yeah, our exact fundraising will be made public, how we did in this past fiscal year, and the fiscal year closed June 30th. That will become available to the community likely in mid-August. But our strategy was to fundraise for the dollars that we were taking out of the endowment so that we wouldn't see as big of an internal hit. And individuals came forward and really supported UJA, knowing that our raison d'etre at this moment, the purpose of all of our allocations, there was no other topic pre the rallies and the social protest. Before that period of time, there was no other purpose than to support people affected by COVID, and that narrative will continue into our future.
With domestic violence, usually it expands to also child abuse. And so how can someone get help? And do they go directly to UJA, or how would they start?
I want to say that for anybody who might be watching this, there are a lot of ways that you can get help. And if you have a friend or a family member who needs help, UJA would love to be a place to help you make a referral and to hold your hand in the process. So we don't provide any direct service at UJA. Really, we operate in such a way that we provide funds to organizations that then enable them to be the on-the-ground partners that are providing the care that is required. So I'd like to share with you a few resources, and please feel free to share this with your friends and family. There's an initiative that we fund in the 5 towns. It's stationed at the Goral JCC, the Jewish Community Center in the 5 towns. And support related to domestic violence is provided by an organization also Long Island rooted called the Safe Center. They deployed their team to Goral to provide case management services specifically for Jewish women, and to make referrals for them to shelters and for counseling. And they really provide comprehensive support, enabling you to get safe housing and to provide advocacy. And this work is done for children and for typically mothers, but sometimes fathers who are victims of abuse. The Shalom Task Force is a confidential hotline, and their phone number, if you're interested, it's 888-883-2323. They'll provide 24-hour guidance to anyone who is looking for immediate support or a referral. Sanctuary for Families is another great organization that specifically caters to Orthodox Jewish women. And OHEL runs a shelter system that is specifically for Jewish women as well. Amudim, another organization, provides counseling and therapeutic services. They're the partner with whom UJA worked to move women into hotel rooms when that was really essential.
Okay, so how did you get involved with the UJA Foundation? What motivated you?
I'm really privileged to serve as the managing director of what we call the Caring Department. It's the Human Service Division of UJA. I would say my work is a combination of my personal ambitions, my connection to my own sense of Judaism, as well as my approach towards social justice and creating caring community. In the Jewish religion, there's a set of commandments that we're all asked to follow. And some might say that different commandments or different mitzvot speak specifically and intimately to different individuals. So for me, the commandment to repair the world, to make our communities, our intimate communities and the world around us, a healing environment, one that is inclusive and recognizes that we all have challenges in our life, has been a guiding force for me as I've approached my professional work. I have a background in social work administration. I have a degree from Columbia University, and I started actually as a social work intern at UJA.
Really? Okay.
And I've been here for almost 16 years now. I see a blurred line between where my professional life starts and my personal life ends. I feel blessed to be able to use the influence and the resources that UJA offers to make change for the good.
Now, did you have any motivating factor of joining UJA because someone you knew was perhaps a mentor or impacted by a situation? I'm curious.
So we all have challenges in our life. I think there's no human being, regardless of how educated you are, how financially resourced you might be, not a single human being is devoid of the challenges that life brings, whether that be domestic violence, raising a child with a disability, aging, anticipating end of life. These are normative challenges, that postpartum depression, infertility, substance abuse. Now, there are also people who are born into a cycle of poverty, and their lives are further complicated, and UJA is there to support them. But we recognize, even though the vast majority of our resources are really going towards the communities most economically vulnerable, that everyone has needs. So in the helping process, in a role as a servant to the community, I see healing in my own life, because we recognize through our interventions that we're destigmatizing all of the issues that plague all of us. And we have the opportunity in the financial support that we provide, in the discussions that we're having right now, in opportunities like this, to enable a message to be shared that, no one's alone. No one's alone in their suffering. And there's a resource for everybody.
So Facebook and social media are now center stage, especially that we are sheltering in place. A lot of discussions occur in small chat groups like the moms group, etc. And you can see that there is some sort of issue that's underneath the surface. What do you advise, people who are friends with them, how to, direct them? Or, because sometimes, like you said, you can't say anything because your husband reads these things. So, it's a very fine line. How would you respond to that?
I think the sense of social responsibility that we all hold right now is unprecedented. So if you have the opportunity to be part of those groups, and as you're articulating, so many of us are. I'm a part of a group in Westchester. I get emails. I'm inundated with emails from friends and community members about what's happening in their life. So if you know something, you have a responsibility to take care of that individual. All of us hold that responsibility within ourselves. If you're detecting that you have a friend or a family member, in the case of domestic violence, that is experiencing, and even if it's not bruises, any form of verbal abuse,
yes,
or feeling victimized in any way, we have a responsibility to help each other. So I gave the phone number for the Shalom Task Force before. That is an essential vehicle for calling out for help. And you can call out for a friend or a family member, and they'll help you to navigate a next step. And again, there are so many local resources, specifically in the area of Long Island, at the Gorel JCC in partnership with the Safe Center, Amudim, OHEL. These places are open and available for help. And if you need a phone number for any of them directly, you can contact myself at UJA, and I'm happy to provide Elizabeth a list of phone numbers to any of your viewers for all of these institutions.
You've been very insightful into, what is going on and what we need to do in order to address this situation, because unfortunately, domestic violence is really behind the curtain, not very openly seen. And during this stressful time, anything can set that off. Where a perfectly normal situation before has changed dramatically just because of
That's right. That's right.
that we're in. And it's critical, that we reach out to each other. So I thank you for all that advice. I'll definitely be posting these phone numbers. And I hope that I can reach out to you again in the future.
I would welcome that.
Thank you.
Thank you.